Is this more about the Tory party than about delivering Brexit?
No, it's not at all. It's about democracy. It's about the fact that those who have voted with Corbyn actually voted for the referendum by 6-1 in the House of Commons, voted for the Notification of Withdrawal Act, voted for the Withdrawal Act itself, which takes us completely out of the European Union on the 31st of October, and that is the law of the land. They're seeking to reverse that by seeking an extension, but actually there is no justification for that extension. It's costing every single person who's listening to this programme and the entire population of this country £1 billion a month for the arrogance that is being demonstrated by trying to defy the referendum outcome.
What do you think the plan is right now? I mean, is this all part of the 4D chess plan we've been talking about, that Dominic Cummings is sitting there cackling away, that everyone's falling for it? Or is it all going absolutely to the dogs?
No, absolutely not at all. And as a matter of fact, although there's a huge amount of controversy, let's focus on one point, and that is what is in the interests of the country. It's in the interests of the country to have a general election, there's no doubt about that. And remember that within the framework of the Conservative Party, 65% of the parliamentary party voted for Boris Johnson. And in the country, in the grassroots, when they had the vote by the book associations, 66% voted for him. He has a complete mandate as Tory Prime Minister within the framework of the Conservative Party itself, let alone the rest of the country. And actually, the reality is that people are entitled to have a view as expressed in a general election. And as everybody knows, this is the longest session since I don't know when, 200 years or something or other. So it's absolutely outrageous that the Labour Party are running away from a general election. And why are they doing that? It's as plain as a pikestaff. They know they're not going to win. But they're waiting, they're trying to and there is this sort of aspiration to try to delay things in order to be able to somehow or other pull some magic out of the hat.
If Boris refuses to act on the legislation that Parliament has passed, Parliament will bring him down. All right? There will be a motion of confidence towards the end of October. Parliament will bring him down. That could mean a Corbyn caretaker government, or failing that, a general election. Whichever way I look at this, we are going to have a general election before Christmas.
There is no love lost between you and Dominic Cummings. Could that be the thing that is stopping a deal happening? In which case, does Boris Johnson need to get rid of Dominic Cummings before there can be a deal?
Well, Dominic Cummings, I mean, over the last few years, it's not just me he's been against the ERG as well. Cummings has always been against what he would have seen as hardline leavers, and yet he now appears to be the man behind Boris Johnson, pushing a message that we'll leave with no deal if we can't improve the current one. So maybe Dominic Cummings' politics has changed over the course of the last 3 or 4 years. I don't know. But ultimately, if you add up in the opinion polls where the Tories are, where the Brexit Party are, and put them together, all right, not every one of those voters will come across. But even if you take a bit off the top of both, together, in a pact, in a general election, we would be unstoppable. And ultimately, whatever Dominic Cummings' personal traits may be, he's no fool.
Would you be willing to risk a Corbyn government and no Brexit at this point?
I'm not prepared to risk being sold out for the new European treaty that is the withdrawal agreement that will leave us arguably in a worse place than staying members of the European Union. I want Brexit, a clean Brexit, so that we're an independent country. And if Boris comes to that point of view, I should be delighted. And I've already said, Julia, that to the 28 members of the ERG who 3 times voted against that treaty, we will not stand against any of them. We will actually encourage people to work for them and support them. That offer is open to other Conservative MPs as well. I cannot do more than I'm doing to try and help people who want to get a proper Brexit. Let's see what Boris decides to do.
Is it for you just finally, is it all or nothing? We get a proper Brexit or we don't have any Brexit at all, and you would rather remain?
I just think if we were to sign up to that withdrawal agreement, even without the backstop, it would lead to years and years of acrimony, an incessant campaign for us to rejoin the European Union, and the humiliation of our nation to accept laws and court judgments from an organisation in which we had no say whatsoever, and yet we're still paying 10 to 15 billion pounds every year. It must not happen. And if you look at public opinion, if you ask people a straightforward binary choice, Do you want to leave with a clean Brexit, or do you want to extend and have a second referendum? There is now a massive majority that prefer the first option over the second. And I'm optimistic that we can get there.
What is he going to do? Is he going to resign? Is he going to break the law? What's he planning to do? Has he told you?
No. But I mean, first of all, as far as Parliament's concerned, this is a zombie Parliament full of zombie politicians, including a zombie speaker. It is only causing mischief for the government. What we've actually got is a Remain-dominated Parliament. It always has been. But by having a Prime Minister who was determined to get us out of the European Union, it has flushed them out of Julia. So we've seen their true colours, and they've got rather desperate. So it's best that it goes on prorogation. I think that there'll be a legal challenge to the withdrawal amendment, requiring the letter to the European Union demanding or asking for an extension. I'm not sure whether that's going to be 2 letters, 3 letters or more, but I think there's going to be a legal challenge by number 10. And Boris is very clear. He certainly doesn't want to ask for that extension. As far as the Conservatives are concerned, I think he appreciates that extension is extinction if we're not careful, as far as confidence with the voters are concerned. And the shenanigans and the showmanship we saw orchestrated with the Remain opposition in the chamber last night by the Speaker, it merely exemplifies exactly why he's been biased all the way through. It was very telling that the standing ovation when he announced his resignation was all from the opposition benches, when, as far as I'm concerned, given the way that he's behaved over the last few years, he should have been actually the government benches that were cheering.
The main thing in our mind at the moment is how we stop the UK crashing out of the EU at the end of October without a deal. The Prime Minister says he'd die in a ditch rather than see that happening. He's lost control of the Commons, and therefore it's very important that he can't get round that problem by calling an election and then, via that means, frustrating our leaving the EU.
If there was a vote which involved simply a one majority vote, just one MP in the majority, where you could actually have a vote which specified a specific day for that general election, why wouldn't Lib Dem MPs, along with other opposition MPs, support that?
Well, we're absolutely keen to get 2 decisions taken. One on who the government should be via a general election, and secondly, how we deal with Brexit. Our view, and my personal view, very, very strongly, is that you've got to solve the Brexit problem before you can solve everything else that's wrong with the way the country's going at the moment. My view is that you should have a vote on a referendum by the people to lance the boil of Brexit one way or another, and then immediately have an election. Suppose you have an election where you end up with a result which is inconclusive, which is highly likely no party has a majority. You then find that you've got days and weeks of wrangling to put together a government. That government may not be a strong government simply because you can't find people to coalesce. That means that the Brexit purgatory just would continue. So let's get shot of that problem by having people decide what they want to do with Brexit and then move on to having an election.
You tell me any one of the major figures in the Leave campaign who ever stalked the country and said, leave and leave without a deal. They did not do it. On the contrary, from Boris Johnson downwards, it was said that a good deal would be secured for Britain.
Absolutely. So I agree with you.
The people of Britain, yes, voted to leave. And my very strong view is that we have to do everything possible to meet
Dromey, on that I agree with you. However, of course, we know that on the Remain side, they made it very clear that we would, in their words, crash out without a deal if we didn't get a good deal. The reality is, of course, very difficult to get a deal when you've got half of the British Parliament working on the side of the EU. Can I ask you also about the Speaker?
Working on the side of the EU?
Yes.
Shame on you. Shame on you.
Jack Dromey, with all due respect, shame on you and your colleagues. Now, yesterday...
Shame on you, Julia.
Yes, carry on.
What you are doing is impugning the integrity of MPs.
Oh, absolutely.
across all parties.
100% I'm impugning the integrity of MPs. I'm impugning the integrity of some former cabinet ministers working in the British government who were actually on the side of the EU. Downright I am. And so are many voters listening to this right now.
This morning's story, therefore, is Julia Hartley-Brewer.
No, it's not the story at all.
The arch-Brexiteer is lampooning members of Parliament on the basis of voting with their conscience and in the best interests of their constituents.
You might be voting with your conscience. You're not voting with the manifesto on which you were elected, Jack Dromey.
The manifesto was to honour the wish of the British people.
To deliver Brexit.
I worked night and day to honour that. But that we have to protect the interests of our country as we leave the European Union.
Okay.
News never used to be entertainment when I was growing up. It was rather prosaic, and there was a person behind the. It really annoys me.
They sat down. They didn't have to stand up either.
Yeah, I know, and sort of wander around this huge sort of computer-generated, And also, what really annoys me about when the BBC do a news report about the BBC, and they go, and let's cut live to such and such at the BBC. He's 100 yards out there. Just get him in the studio, the poor fella. It's freezing out there.
Absolutely. But I mean, you could not have had a better time to do this. I mean, we always say this is a great time for journalists, a great time for comedians. I have to say, it's a terrible time for voters. But in terms of the amount of, I suppose, just raw stuff you've got to put into your comedy.
The worse the world gets, the better my career does. So, I mean, it swings and roundabouts, really. But I'm convinced I'll be holding my Oscar at the moment Nuclear Armageddon happens.
But do you think so? Because if you are mocking the left, you see, it's
as well as the right.
That's the key thing. In comedy now, it's absolutely all comedy. Certainly, you see on the BBC, all the primetime shows. It's all mocking Brexiteers. It's all mocking the right,
which is appalling.
I'm absolutely in favour of everyone mocking Brexiteers and mocking. Absolutely, that is part of the job, and comedians should be doing it, and where people need to be mocked. But there's really very little mocking the left.
Absolutely. I mean, I've been a recent person to join the comedy community, if you like, and I've been amazed at how censorious it is. I've been amazed at how many comedians, certainly on the mainstream, are frightened of having a go at the excesses of identity politics and things like that. And it's no wonder. I mean, when I did that piece about, how bad Hillary Clinton is, or when I've done pieces about freedom of speech, which is something I believe passionately in, I have had huge amounts of abuse from comedians who have, their own television show on the BBC. I mean, I've been called all sorts of horrible, I'm considered a right-wing comedian by some comedians because they can't bear to have their excesses. If I was just having a go at the Tories and just having a go at people that voted differently to me, then I'd be a hero. Well, that's just boring.
Whether he gets a deal or not, there's still going to be a general election in a matter of weeks.
Well, Stephen Kinnock is one of the sane members of the Labour Party that I was referring to when I said I think a number will come with us. Stephen is doing a very good job trying to pull people together. My impression is, from the people that I talk to, and of course members of Parliament do talk to real people as they're described.
Is that allowed?
Well, it would be dangerous, but nevertheless, yes. The impression that I get is that people want a deal. They want to leave. That's the decision that's been taken by the British people. That's a decision that I've accepted and virtually all of my colleagues have accepted. But they want a deal. If Mr. Johnson can deliver a deal, okay, he may not take the ERG with him, he may not take the DUP with him, but he may take enough of the House of Commons representing the interests of the British people. And this is the important thing. This is not, or shouldn't be, about the Conservative Party or the Labour Party or Tom Watson or Mr. Corbyn.
That's easy to say.
Well, it should not be about that. It should be about the interests of the United Kingdom and the people of the United Kingdom. And I believe, and I think a majority in the House, on both sides of the House, believes that it is in the interests of the people of the United Kingdom, and indeed, to be fair, the people of Europe, that in the interests of our economies and our security, that we leave the European Union in good shape, with a good relationship, with the best deal that we can deliver under the circumstances.
I know I don't want to speak badly of my colleagues, but let's face it,
but you're going to.
It's been a shambles, and I would very much like the shadow cabinet to just lock themselves away in a room for a few days and come out when they have a single, clear, aligned position on this. But in my view, we should cut through all of this and be clear that the way to solve this mess is not through a second referendum, it's not through a general election, it's by leaving the EU with a deal. And that's why we launched the MPs for a Deal group yesterday. We're saying that there's a solid, realistic basis for a deal. We're not saying it should be a carbon copy of what came out of the cross-party talks, but it's a very solid, realistic basis that's been, in essence, landed with the EU. Let's sort that out. Boris Johnson needs to get some changes on the backstop. That's a Tory party problem. That's not really a Labour Party problem. Bring that back with the package of really good commitments and concessions to Labour that came out of the cross-party talk, and we have the basis for parliamentary majority. So let's drop the talk of a second referendum. Let's drop the talk of a general election. Let's leave the EU on the basis of a deal. I've always felt that 52-48 was a mandate to move house but stay in the same neighbourhood. We can't have a position which says this is what the 52% wanted, because it's not a monolithic bloc.
Hold on a minute. Though.
Yeah,
what would have been the percentage victory for Leave that would have meant that it was a percentage victory for Leave that we didn't have to worry about what the minority wanted?
I mean, I can't give you numbers.
Well, exactly.
We're just pulling numbers out of the air. I think we have to just interpret the mandate that we were given.
The mandate was to leave the European Union.
Yes, but it is, in my view, when you aggregate that mandate, it is about moving house but staying in the same neighbourhood. And what would be good for the Labour Party, and I think as well good for a mainstream Conservative Party, which is both of us are our whole nation multi-issue parties. If we go down the road of another referendum, we will, or having a general election whilst we're still in the EU, it will just be another proxy for this awful, divisive, polarised, single-issue politics, which is not good for anybody, in my view. It might be good for the Brexit Party, it might be good for the Lib Dems, but it's not good for those of us who want to try to reunite our deeply divided country.
If you had to predict right now, Stephen King, what you think is going to happen in the next month, because all the people I've been speaking to on both sides all say, to a man and a woman, I don't know. What do you think is going to happen?
Well, the Prime Minister has three choices. He can either break the law by refusing to seek an extension, or he can resign, or he can get a deal. And I think it's pretty clear which one of those three would be most palatable to him. It should be to number 10, to the government and to Parliament and to the rest of the country. Please, let's put the country out of its misery. Let's get a deal that can command a parliamentary majority, and let's move forward so we can get our politics back onto the issues that really matter to the people on the doorstep in my Aberafon constituency: jobs, education, the future of our children, our health service, and our communities.
I have the greatest regard for the role of the Speaker of the House of Commons. It is a very senior, very responsible role, and it's vital that it is carried out impartially and without bias to any one cause or indeed to any one political party. And so I think it is right that the Speaker should be standing down at this juncture, and I'm very pleased to hear it, but obviously it's a decision for him. And I'm delighted that there are some very good candidates to take over in that role, including my very good friend who is a Deputy Speaker right now, Eleanor Lang.
And what do you make of the claims by people like Harriet Harman? She's the mother of the House, longest-serving female MP. She has said she's putting her hat into the ring along with Eleanor Lang, and of course Lindsay Hoyle, the Deputy Speaker of the House of Commons. And she's saying, it's time for another woman. Do you think it's relevant what gender the next Speaker has?
I think the impartiality is the key point. It needs to be somebody who will both uphold the highest standards of behaviour and not be somebody who is either inciting or indeed humiliating MPs on any benches. But at the same time, it needs to be someone who will ensure that there is a clear chairing, an umpiring, a refereeing, not that you've got the sort of cheerleader for one side or the other side sat in the chair trying to help them out. So I think the impartiality, the fairness, the decency, the treating people with dignity and respect, those are the things that I would like to see from a speaker.
Are you saying that you haven't been seeing that in recent years?
You might think that, Julia.
You couldn't possibly comment.
I couldn't possibly comment.
I get the whole fireman, firefighter, firewoman. I get that. if they want to change the terminology to Firefighter Sam, then that's fine. But really, to ban it is absolutely ridiculous.
But exactly, he is a very, very loved character. And I have to say, my daughter loved Fireman Sam, and I was telling the story earlier on that when she was about 4 or 5, she wanted to be a fire officer. She'd said fire officer, that's what she'd be. Put a picture on the wall of the reception class, that's what she wanted to be. In no way did the fact that Fireman Sam was a man put her off. And again, I don't think children think in those sort of characters. I think they just think they're just a character. But the Fireman Sam cartoon series, which he represents, he's not a character on his own, as anyone who's actually watched would know, has a very strong female fire officer character in it.
Absolutely. And the thing is, Julia, if you actually kind of get to the bottom of this, it's absolute nonsense, because if you go to most fire stations across the country, and Lincolnshire specifically as well, if you go into fire stations and look for female accommodation, look for female facilities, they don't have any. Or if they do, it's completely inadequate. So it's all very well for them to bang the drum for equality and that they want more women to join. However, they're not actually doing anything practically that would help women join. So as a firefighter on a fire station, I can tell you the amount of issues we had with female-only accommodation where we weren't able to have any, or they were letting men use it, or the whole trans issue. That is what stops females joining the fire service.
But wait a second. Realistically, I don't think most, 13-year-old girls are planning to be fire officers. An awful lot of 13-year-old boys are. There are going to be some jobs which are going to appeal for various different reasons, some nature, some nurture, to boys over girls and girls over boys, aren't there?
Absolutely. And, with the shift system, with the fire service, it isn't particularly female-friendly, especially if you have children. So there's never going to be, as much as we strive to have 50% fire.
But why? Why should we
strive
strive to have 50% female firefighters?
Well, I don't know. You want to ask chief officers that. It's not something I would waste my time with.
Has anyone ever said to you, when you were helping them out of a fire, has anyone said, oh, thank God you're a woman?
No, it does help on occasions.
The Yellowhammer documents make clear that huge numbers of businesses are unprepared. You see, there's been so much exiting politics going on. There's been no blinking preparation going on.
But we know that's ongoing now, though, don't we? Would it not be easier for businesses to prepare if they actually believed it was going to happen? If everyone in the country said, right, this is going to happen and this is what we're going to do. We all know exactly what the situation is going to be and this is what we're going to do. When we still have these sort of machinations, is it, isn't it? Will there be a delay? Will there be a letter sent to Brussels on October the 19th? When we have is that not part of the problem?
No, I don't think it is part of the problem. I think the fundamental problem with this, and I do hope you would agree with me, is that when Brexit happened after the vote in 2016, the Brexiteer campaigners, those campaigning to leave, did not have a plan, did not have a Scooby about what it actually meant and how it was going to work. And
that was up to politicians to decide, wasn't it? That was up to politicians to enact. The people who were running the Vote Leave campaign were largely not actually elected politicians.
Well, I think there were enough of them, the Faragists and the Boris Johnsons of this world. These were meant to be experienced politicians who knew what they were doing. Lo and behold, they knew nothing, no plan, and that chicken has now come home to roost.
On the most optimistic assumption, this is according to them, at least 2,000 trucks a day will arrive at Dover without adequate French customs documentation to start with. When they get to Calais, they will have to go through hours of checks in a lorry park in order to be let through, and the lorry park has only got 300 spaces. That seems to be the fundamental problem, 2,000 trucks a day trying to get into 300 spaces, and when that lorry park in Calais is full, the authorities in Calais will stop any more ferries coming in.
That's
so
all
the trucks will back up in Dover.
Okay, there are two key assumptions there. One is that there will be checks on every single lorry, which we don't see. Look, we don't see at the current time, even with goods that are coming from outside the EU right now. But also the idea that
the French will check every single lorry. They'll do it when the lorry gets onto the ferry at Dover, so it'll happen on the ferry, and if the truck hasn't got adequate documentation, it'll have to go through an amber lane at Calais, which will take it into this.
Okay, and again, I was just going to say, it's another big if. I can understand that in the early, maybe the first couple of days, people haven't got the correct documentation. We know that there's been a big increase, but not enough of an increase in the number of companies that have applied to get the correct documentation and know what they're doing. But But the idea that week after week, all these lorry companies are going to be sending their lorries to Dover and to Calais without the correct paperwork, even though last time they had to wait in a queue and they think, oh, I'll just do it again because it worked out so well last time. I mean, how thick do we actually think that our private contractors actually are in this country?
Well, you'll have seen the Yellowhammer document published overnight. I've been looking at it. I mean, they estimate, this is the government's official estimates, that it'll be 6 months of disruption.
No, it's not. No, it's their worst-case planning assumption.
It's the reasonable worst case, that's right.
Yes.
That's what they're
But you do know a worst-case scenario isn't necessarily what happens. I mean, the worst-case scenario every time I get on a plane is that the plane crashes and I die. But amazingly, it hasn't happened yet and I get to my destination. How concerned are you that this would be the case? Because it seems to me a lot of the people who are saying that a no-deal Brexit would be absolutely terrible are also the same people who say that any Brexit of any kind would be absolutely terrible.
The government needs to be honest and upfront about its own assessments, and it's tried to conceal them. And its own assessments is that a no-deal Brexit is going to be very disruptive and affect people's quality of life, in some cases their well-being and their health. But those are serious issues. It's unprecedented in peacetime for a government to inflict this kind of thing deliberately on its own citizens. It may be something which happens if you have a hurricane or a storm, but it's not something which you go around and do to yourself. And my view is that Brexit is a very bad idea, but no-deal Brexit is an even worse idea because of that. It's inevitable that people are going to make an assessment based on their judgment on Brexit, because I suppose if you think that Brexit is the most wonderful thing that can happen to this country, you may think that a period of several months' disruption is a price worth paying. I personally don't think it is. But in any event, the government should be honest about the consequences of its own policies. And it is the dishonesty that has crept in, the tendency to say one thing when it becomes perfectly plain that there is another, which corrodes trust in government and corrodes trust in our democracy.
Will you be seeking to appeal the decision to remove the whip from you and to be allowed to stand as a Tory candidate at the next election, whenever it is?
I would be delighted if the party can heal its wounds and I can be in amity and concord with my colleagues in the Conservative Party. But that will come about when we can find a common policy position that we can take forward together. Otherwise, I think the suggestions put forward are pointless, and I might add that at the moment I've had no approach from the whips to myself on the subject.
But so are you saying while there is still a policy to go for a deal or no deal Brexit, you will not want to rejoin your parliamentary colleagues?
It's not a question of not wanting to rejoin the party. After all, I've been chucked out. So as far as I'm concerned, I wouldn't have left the party despite my rebellion because there are matters on which we are in agreement. But I'm not going to go along to request my return into the party by an appeal process. I think the Prime Minister was wrong to deprive us of the whip, but it was his choice. He's got to make up his mind what he wants.
This is an assumption about paint a picture what could be the worst cases, and then you have to add, and if the government did nothing about it. Well, we are doing something about it, and so I'm fairly confident. I'm confident that in many of these scenarios we won't get there. And at the same time, we are actually working to try and get a deal with the EU, contrary to allegations, and hopefully we'll be in a much stronger place, so that huge amounts of this scenario thing will never happen.
But you say you're fairly confident, not very confident, in many of these scenarios we won't get that. That's not the most reassuring thing for a senior cabinet minister to say.
No, I am. Look, I am pretty confident that 99.9% of most of these things will not happen. But of course, what we do know, we're divorcing from a deep relationship of 40 years. No one is going to say it is going to be totally painless. No one is going to say that this thing is not going to see a change. But what it will say is that if the government does something about it and uses its might and its power and its money, and your taxpayers' money, to do something about it, we can mitigate in the vast majority of cases those effects on people. And I think that's right. And if I hadn't planned for that, if I didn't have scenario planning, you would quite rightly have me on your programme the day something goes wrong and said, why didn't you plan for it? And so, of course, we're planning for it. And as Defence Secretary and as previously as the Security Minister, that's what I used to do every day about horrendous threats to this country. It is the bread and butter for government and to make a sort of conspiracy that the Labour Party are trying to do out of the scenario planning is completely misses the point. Of course we will do that.
This would be like you walking, getting up in the morning and asking yourself a very simple question. Oh, my God, I've got to cross the road. Well, that could lead to my demise. If I don't look right, what if I didn't look right? What if somebody else didn't stop at the zebra crossing? What if there was a barrier in the way and I crossed at the wrong point? All of this stuff. This is the kind of stuff they're dealing with. They're saying, oh, that won't be right, that won't be right, that won't be done, that will never be done. That means we won't get this. And so all of this stuff, 5 pages, that's all it is, of summary views from people saying, well, it could happen, so let's say it will happen.
We are depriving ourselves of the protection of the European Union. Now, it's good to have contingency planning in any situation, but when you look at the contingency planning and you see that there is an option which would avoid all of it, and that option is staying in the European Union, stopping Brexit, then surely that's the sensible thing to do.
Again, I sort of despair at the idea that we need this protection, that we're not a proud nation state. I mean, most countries in the world.
We are a proud nation
well,
state.
But Christine, most countries
that sees the sensible. We're a proud nation state that reached out 40 years ago to our partners and said, you know what? We've been through a lot together. Let's try and build a better future. And that's what we did. And that's what we should continue to do. We are strong within the European Union, and we should remember that, and we should work with it.
Okay, I would argue I absolutely want the free trade, and I'm absolutely happy to work with our wonderful friends and continental cousins. It doesn't mean they have to have a sentence. But the argument you just made, and it's all very lovely. Now, I mean, it sounds wonderful on a stage at the Lib Dem conference in the next week, and everyone's going to be cheering and clapping and agreeing you. The trouble is, you put that case to the British people in 2016, and they gave their answer. You put that case again in 2017.
3 years ago.
Yeah, I don't know.
You put that case to the British people.
Okay,
last
and you
year,
put
and you liked it.
And you put that case in 2017 in the general election.
That case last year,
Christine,
Julia.
please, I won't interrupt you. Would it be all right if we could just finish it, because it's not very nice for the listener to hear. In 2017, you put that case, and yes, you did pretty well. But you're not the government, which is a bit of a giveaway, with only 12 MPs you were elected with in that year. And again at the European elections in May, again, Lib Dems did very well, but you came second, a very, very long way behind the Brexit Party, which came first. So I'm not quite sure why you think that, even though you think it's not a good idea, I think the thing that a lot of Leavers don't understand is why, because you think it's not a good idea, do you think that that gives you the right to override the wishes of the majority?
No, that's not what we're saying. What we're saying is that Joe Swenson's Liberal Democrats are the strongest party for Remain, and there is a huge groundswell in this country which supports Remain and is getting round Joe Swenson's Liberal Democrats joining us every day. Now, look at those election results in 2019. We did put our argument to the people, and they did like it, and they're continuing to like it because they see the reality of Brexit. Now, we're not trying to say that you ignore the results 3.5 years ago. Of course you don't. But you are.
No, you are saying that.
Come on, you said I wasn't interrupting you. You give the people the opportunity to say whether or not they've changed their minds. Because democracy is not a static thing. You don't make a decision and you're stuck with it. Every 5 years we change government. But also, democracy depends on different voices. How do any of us know that we're right unless we hear the opposing argument? You can't just silence your opponent. You have to give them a vote.
No, I'm good. Christine, no one has silenced the Remainers. You guys have droned on for 3 years. No one silenced you. But also, I have to check up on this point. This idea that democracy doesn't stop at every 5 years we change government. We do. We have an election. We enact the result of that election, and a government is formed. And then we have another election. Obviously, it may well be sooner than 5 years in this case. But we don't. That's not what's happened with the referendum. If we enacted the result of the referendum and then people wanted to think again and you wanted to campaign to start to go back in, that would be completely democratically legitimate. But you cannot compare having a referendum, fighting against it, ignoring it for 3 or 4 years, and then say that that's the same as having an election every 5 years. It just isn't the same thing. Do you think, though, that actually this is all part of this cunning game plan from Dominic Cummings and this is where we're supposed to be, or is it all just gone horribly wrong?
Well, I think what is likely to happen is that the government will respect the law, will obey the law, but the law will be interpreted in different ways by different groups of lawyers. Now, there's a surprise, and I think what we have to avoid is the end game where whether we leave or stay in the European Union is decided by a few High Court judges. I think most people would regard that as completely unacceptable, because this is the biggest political issue of our decade. Many of us feel it was settled decisively by the electorate with that very large 17.4 million vote in favour of leaving, which Parliament said would be the decision. And I really don't think some people in Parliament and judges should then work away to find a way of overturning that against the wishes of the majority.
Why do you think that everything that the EU says is almost the word of God handed down to you? And why do you think that everything said by Number 10 is untrue?
Well, I wouldn't quite say it's the word of God that comes from Brussels, but the point is that Boris Johnson has been seriously caught out. The Court of Session in Scotland this week has made it very clear that he's acted out with his authority and, of course, that he has lied to the Queen. And that's not for the first time. He's been sacked twice, once as a journalist, and he was sacked by Michael Howard when he was leader of the Conservative Party for lying. So let's just say that Boris has form. Look, we've been checking with the European Union over the course of the last few days. There is no evidence whatsoever that any meaningful talks are taking place. This is all about Boris Johnson running down the clock, making sure that he can stick to what he wants to do, which is drive us out of the European Union on a no-deal basis at the end of October. And the real problem he's now got is that there's an act of Parliament that forbids him from doing that in the absence of not having a meaningful deal by the 19th of October.
Okay, but realistically, I can't see how any deal can actually be voted through unless it was sitting there on the table and people were indicating behind the scenes they were going to vote for it before the 19th of October, because actually that's the crucial date now, not the 31st of October.
That's right.
When Parliament comes back, Queen's speech 14th of October after party conferences, and then we have the 17th and 18th, we have the European Council meeting where everyone is presumably thinking this is going to be the crunch time. And on the 19th of October, he is required now by law, you and other opposition members voted for, to ask for that extension. Now, Boris Johnson is still saying, absolutely not. He is not going to ask for that extension. But he's also saying, quite categorically, he's not going to break the law. There does seem to be some expectation that someone in Downing Street, presumably Dominic Cummings, has a cunning plan up their sleeve. Do we have any idea what that cunning plan is? Because it looks to me that you'd framed that law in very specific terms. It not only gives the date, it says that he has to do it himself, the Prime Minister has to do it. It gives the wording of the letter he has to send. Short of him putting a second-class stamp on the letter and hoping it doesn't turn up by October the 31st, is there any other way out of it?
Not really, unless he's talking about resigning, which is entirely possible, because there doesn't really seem to be a way, Julia. And if we win the case in the Supreme Court next week, then we're going to make life easy for him, because he's going to bring Parliament back the week after. He can't get out of that. If he has a plan, and he's been asked several times in the House of Commons, tell us what it is. And there's no evidence of that. And you're quite right, the clock is ticking. And I think one of the other factors in this, remember when he went to see Andrea Merkel, and he was told that, OK, you've got 30 days to bring forward proposals. So that's taking us up to the 26th of September. That's another important date. So he's got 13 days from now, by the deadline that was set by Mrs. Merkel, to show Europe he's got a credible plan.
I do find it extraordinary that as somebody who thinks it's outrageous that Westminster has any say in the running of Scotland, that you think it's acceptable for the German Chancellor to tell the British Prime Minister by what time, offering deadlines by what time they have to bring things to her table. I do find that an extraordinary attitude.
Well, he had bilateral talks with Andrea Merkel, and he was the one that accepted.
Angela Merkel does not set deadlines for the British Prime Minister, whoever that British Prime Minister. If it was you, I wouldn't want her to.
No, I'm not suggesting he did, but the important point is that we're stuck in a situation that none of us, yourselves, parliamentarians, know what's in Boris Johnson's head. He's trying to create this image.
Do you think he knows? No, a genuine question. Do you think there is a cunning plan and we just don't know what it is? Or do you think that it's all, they figured that Labour would have to take the bait and go for a general election and then it would have happened and they thought they would win that, and they haven't really game planned what's happening now?
No, I think you're right. I think they were trying to tease the opposition, that the opposition would accept this offer of an election, and this would take everything away from the focus on this, would come back, and in effect he'd try and sneak no deal through.
The worst thing this week for me has been the behaviour of the Speaker. I think it's just brought the whole of Parliament into complete disrepute.
But what do you make of his comments yesterday in a speech he gave? We just quoted those, we just played them out. I've got to be honest with you, Kate. I can't bear listening to the man's voice, but I felt that long before the Brexit issue. And I know we've got half the country cheering him on, half the country booing him, or just turning off the radio when his voice comes on. But he's basically saying, look, that Boris Johnson can't choose which laws he obeys and doesn't obey. If he breaks his law, it'll be the same as saying, it's to deliver something that people want. It'll be the same as a bank robber taking the money, thinking it's okay because he's giving the money to charity. Should he be using language like bank robber? I mean, Boris Johnson got told off for talking in an article of The Telegraph last year, referring to women wearing burqas and niqabs looking like they were bank robbers, and he's chosen to use that term. I wonder if that's a deliberate dig.
Oh, absolutely. And he's going to do anything in the next few weeks to, A, keep himself in the news, because he loves to see himself in the news, and secondly, to do anything he can to act as the cheerleader for the Stop Brexit campaign. I mean, that's really how he should be now billed. He has done everything he could. And, the law in Parliament, one of the biggest majorities was when we voted to actually bring in the withdrawal agreement, which has now gone through. So that's law. So the law, as he has tried to change things and interpret it, I can see why the Prime Minister would still be sitting there thinking, well, actually, Parliament did vote to revoke Article 50. It did vote for a no deal if we couldn't get a deal when we revoked that Article 50. So I've almost got to the stage where I feel that if we actually don't get out now on October the 31st, there is going to be such an upsurge of anger in the country that it's very, very worrying. And then when we see political parties refusing to have what would be a democratic exercise, a general election, then you really wonder just what is happening.
It must be easy for you now to see with perhaps some clearer eyes how ordinary people getting on with their jobs and lives view MPs at Westminster. Do you think they're coming out of this on either side with glory?
Not at all. Not at all. I mean, I look back at Westminster, I barely recognise the place where I used to work. It was always, a strange place, quite in many ways, but not like this, open sort of protest and, just behaviour which is sometimes not befitting of Parliament. I mean, it's on both sides as well, Rees-Mogg lying on the front bench, what a terrible image that was, and then, of course, people singing. And I honestly, Parliament isn't a place for behaviour like that. It's actually a place for compromise in the end, where you find solutions in the national interest. That's what it's meant to do, and it's not doing that, and that's why people feel so angry with it. In the end, we have to have a solution, and I would say, Julia, the compromise that the country can unite behind is leaving, respecting the referendum result, but with a practical deal. And everyone's energy should be 100% focused on that. Okay. That, in the end, is where this issue needs to go, to get us all back together so we can get focused again on trains, buses and young people and all the things we should be doing.
In politics, there has been over the years this desperate need to be all things to all people and as wet as anything. I don't think that actually is what people vote for. People like a bit of personality. They like a bit of charisma. And I'll say this, Boris Johnson's got both personality and charisma.
Then it leads me to ask you about Theresa May. Of course, you used to be on the Home Affairs brief. As a minister, you had to meet with Theresa May when she was on the Home Secretary here. What did you make of Theresa May?
Well, she was professional, and I have to say I didn't think that she was ever going to win an election, and she was, I thought, pretty lucky to get through that last one.
You didn't? Did you think at the time that she was the woman who could deliver Brexit?
No.
Oh, do get off that fence. If you could give a word, I have an awful lot of politicians do listen to this show. I know, because sometimes they text me angry about things I'm saying. It doesn't really have much effect on me. But if any politicians listening on the Brexit side, on the Remain side, what would you, just your final message as a friendly politician from the other side of the world, one of our oldest allies from a Commonwealth state, a former colony, what would you say to them?
I would say to them, stop saying the people got it wrong, because no matter what, the people always get it right. That's the point of a democracy, and that's what they're voting for. They're voting to take back their country, and whether or not it's going to be inconvenient for some people, and some people might lose some money, but please remember, that's why we're there. They vote us in and they vote us out.